We use only 10% of our brain. The idea that humans use only 10% of their brains has lived quietly in popular culture for more than a century. It appears in self-help books, films, motivational speeches, and casual conversations, repeated so often that it feels like established truth. The statement suggests hidden potential waiting to be unlocked, a vast mental reserve that remains dormant in everyday life. Over time, the phrase became less of a hypothesis and more of a cultural assumption, simple and compelling enough to survive without evidence. Its origins are not tied to a single discovery, but rather to a chain of misunderstandings. Early neurological research, conducted at the end of the 19th and beginning of the 20th century, revealed that different areas of the brain seemed to specialize in different tasks. Some regions were easier to observe because they produced visible changes when damaged, while others were more difficult to interpret. The absence of clear function was sometimes mistaken for absence of activity. From this uncertainty, the idea of unused brain regions slowly formed. At the same time, early psychologists were trying to describe intelligence and cognitive ability in ways that the public could understand. Statements about untapped mental potential were simplified and repeated, gradually losing their original nuance. Over decades, the message transformed into a neat, memorable claim. Most of the brain remains inactive. Modern neuroscience paints a very different picture. Brain imaging technologies, including functional MRI and PET scans, allow scientists to observe activity across the entire brain in real time. These tools show a constant pattern of communication between regions, even during rest. Areas responsible for movement, memory, perception, and emotion interact continuously, forming a dense network rather than isolated modules. Activity shifts depending on the task, but no large portion remains permanently silent. Even simple actions require widespread cooperation. Reading a sentence activates visual processing, language comprehension, memory retrieval, and attention networks simultaneously. Listening to music engages emotional centers alongside auditory processing. Planning a movement triggers coordination between sensory input and motor control. The brain operates less like a machine with inactive parts and more like an ecosystem, where every component contributes to stability and function. Energy consumption also reveals the truth. The human brain represents a small percentage of total body mass, yet it consumes a significant share of the body's energy. Such a demanding organ would not be maintained by evolution if most of it served no purpose. Biological systems tend to conserve resources, favoring efficiency rather than redundancy. The continued development and protection of neural structures indicate their importance for survival. Cases of brain injury further challenge the myth. Damage to almost any region leads to measurable consequences. Changes in memory, perception, movement, or personality. There is no vast, functionless area that can be lost without effect. Each section plays a role, sometimes subtle, sometimes critical, but rarely irrelevant. The persistence of the 10% belief reflects more than scientific misunderstanding. It resonates emotionally. The idea offers comfort, suggesting that human limitations are temporary and that extraordinary ability lies just beneath the surface. It transforms complexity into a simple narrative about potential. In a world filled with uncertainty, such clarity feels reassuring. Over time, repetition strengthens belief. A statement heard often enough becomes familiar, and familiarity can feel like evidence. Media portrayals reinforce the concept, presenting characters who suddenly unlock hidden mental power. Motivational messages adopt the phrase because it is easy to remember and inspiring to imagine. The claim survives not because it is accurate, but because it fits human expectations about growth and possibility. Scientific knowledge, however, replaces myth with a quieter understanding. The brain is already active, already engaged, already working at remarkable capacity. Potential does not come from awakening and used territory, but from refining connections, strengthening skills, and adapting to new experiences. Learning changes patterns of activity, practice improves coordination between regions, and memory evolves through repetition. Development is not about switching something on. It is about shaping what is already alive. The image of a partially sleeping brain fades when viewed through this lens. In its place stands a dynamic system, constantly adjusting, constantly responding. Even in moments of stillness, neural networks remain active, organizing information and maintaining internal balance. Rest is not inactivity, but a different mode of operation. The myth endures as a cultural artifact, a reminder of how easily scientific uncertainty can become simplified into certainty. It reflects the human desire for hidden reserves and dramatic transformation. Yet the real story is more intricate and more grounded. The brain does not wait to be used. It is already in motion, already engaged in the quiet, continuous work that makes perception, thought, and identity possible. Understanding this shifts the narrative from untapped potential to present capability. The remarkable quality of the brain is not that most of it sleeps, but that so much of it functions together at every moment. Activity replaces emptiness. Complexity replaces simplicity. And in that complexity, the true nature of human cognition becomes visible, not as a dormant resource, but as a living system, constantly active, constantly evolving. Goldfish have a 3-second memory. The belief that goldfish remember only 3 seconds of their lives has circulated for decades, repeated in jokes, cartoons, and everyday conversation. It paints a simple image of a creature drifting through existence without continuity, constantly rediscovering its surroundings as if for the first time. The idea is easy to understand and easy to repeat, which allowed it to spread widely without much resistance. Its origins are unclear, but the myth likely grew from early assumptions about small animals and their cognitive limits. Fish were often viewed as primitive, guided only by instinct and incapable of learning or retaining information. Because their behavior seemed repetitive and quiet, it was interpreted as evidence of short memory rather than a reflection of how they interact with their environment. Over time, this interpretation solidified into a claim that felt factual despite lacking scientific support. Modern research into animal cognition reveals a far more complex reality. Goldfish are capable of learning patterns, recognizing environments, and forming associations between actions and outcomes. Experiments have shown that they can be trained to respond to specific sounds or visual cues, to navigate simple mazes, and to anticipate feeding times. These behaviors require memory that extends well beyond a few seconds, sometimes lasting weeks or even months. Observation over longer periods reinforces this understanding. Goldfish adapt to routines in their environment, responding differently depending on context and prior experience. When placed in tanks with distinct features, they learn the layout and move with familiarity rather than randomness. When exposed repeatedly to certain stimuli, their reactions change, suggesting recognition rather than constant rediscovery. Their memory does not function in the same way as human memory, but it serves similar biological purposes. It helps them locate food, avoid threats, and adjust to changes in surroundings. These abilities increase their chances of survival, shaping behavior through experience. Evolution favors creatures that can learn from the past, and goldfish are no exception. The persistence of the myth reflects a broader tendency to underestimate animals whose communication and behavior differ from our own. Intelligence is often measured through human standards, language, expression, and visible problem-solving, while quieter forms of cognition are overlooked. Because fish do not display emotion or intention in ways people easily recognize, their mental capabilities were long dismissed or simplified. Scientific exploration has gradually shifted this perception. Studies of fish behavior demonstrate social interaction, learning through observation, and memory that influences future decisions. Goldfish can distinguish between shapes and colors, recognize feeding routines, and respond to familiar stimuli even after long intervals. Their world is not a series of disconnected moments but a continuous experience shaped by prior events. The environment also plays an important role. In enriched settings, with varied stimuli and space to explore, goldfish show greater adaptability and more complex behavior. They investigate new objects, alter movement patterns, and respond differently depending on context. This adaptability suggests an internal system capable of processing and storing information over time. The simplicity of the 3-second claim made it memorable. It fit neatly into storytelling, reinforcing the idea of goldfish as symbols of forgetfulness. The phrase became a metaphor, applied to people who seemed absent-minded or easily distracted. In this way, the myth gained cultural life beyond biology, strengthening its presence in everyday language. Repetition turned the statement into accepted knowledge. Each retelling reduced the need for evidence, replacing observation with familiarity. The more often the idea appeared, the more natural it felt. Gradually, the myth separated from its origins and stood on its own, sustained by recognition rather than proof. Scientific findings replaced that narrative with a quieter truth. Goldfish experience continuity. Their behavior reflects memory shaped by repetition and learning. They adjust, recognize, and respond in ways that depend on previous encounters. Their perception of the world may be different from ours, but it is not limited to fleeting seconds. The difference between myth and reality lies in how memory is understood. It does not always announce itself through dramatic action. Sometimes it appears in subtle consistency. A familiar route taken without hesitation, a learned response triggered at the right moment, a gradual change in behavior after repeated exposure. These patterns reveal retention rather than absence. The story of the goldfish becomes less about limitation and more about perception. Humans often interpret stillness as emptiness and repetition as forgetfulness. Yet beneath these impressions lies a system quietly processing experience. Memory exists not as a constant display but as a structure guiding behavior over time. As knowledge evolves, the image of the goldfish shifts. Instead of a creature trapped in endless present moments, it becomes an example of how cognition appears in forms that are easy to overlook. Its memory may be simple compared to human memory, but it is real, functional, and shaped by interaction with the world. The myth survives because it is convenient and familiar. It offers a clear, humorous explanation for behavior that once seemed mysterious. But scientific observation replaces simplicity with understanding. Goldfish remember more than a few seconds. They learn, adapt, and carry traces of past experience into the present. In that quiet continuity, the narrative changes. The goldfish is no longer a symbol of forgetfulness, but a reminder that memory does not always look the way we expect. It can be subtle, steady, and embedded in behavior rather than words. And through that steady process, even a small creature maintains a sense of connection between what has happened and what comes next. The Great Wall of China is visible from space. The belief that the Great Wall of China can be seen from space with the naked eye is one of the most persistent geographical myths in modern culture. It appears in textbooks, travel guides, and casual conversations, repeated so often that it feels inseparable from the monument itself. The statement adds a sense of cosmic scale to an already monumental structure, transforming it from a human achievement into something visible beyond Earth. The origins of this idea reach back long before human spaceflight. Long before astronauts ever left the planet, writers speculated about which man-made structures might be visible from great heights. The Great Wall, stretching across mountains and valleys for thousands of kilometers, seemed like the most logical candidate. Its length captured the imagination, and over time, imagination hardened into assumption. When humans finally entered orbit, the reality proved different. Visibility from space depends not on length alone, but on width, contrast, lighting, and atmospheric conditions. The wall, though extensive, is relatively narrow and built from materials that often blend with the surrounding landscape. From low Earth orbit, it does not stand out clearly against deserts, hills, and stone. Without assistance from cameras or prior knowledge of its location, it is extremely difficult to distinguish. Astronaut accounts gradually corrected the narrative. Many described the challenge of identifying any human-made structure from orbit. Cities become visible because of their size and lighting patterns. Airports, highways, and bridges can sometimes be detected due to contrast and geometry. The Great Wall, however, often disappears into the terrain, its lines broken by erosion, vegetation, and natural contours. The myth persisted because it relied on a powerful mental image. The wall is not only long but symbolic, representing endurance, protection, and human effort across centuries. Associating it with visibility from space elevated its meaning, turning it into a landmark not just on Earth, but in the broader human imagination. The story offered a sense of scale that felt easy to grasp, a structure so vast it could be seen from beyond the planet. Scientific observation introduced a more precise understanding. From orbit, Earth appears complex and textured, filled with patterns that compete for attention. Rivers, mountain ranges, coastlines, and clouds dominate the visual field. Human constructions, unless exceptionally large or brightly illuminated, blend into these natural forms. The wall's materials, stone, earth, and brick, often mirror the colors of the terrain, reducing contrast even further. Technology changes what can be detected. High-resolution cameras and satellites can capture detailed images of the wall, mapping its path with clarity. These tools rely on magnification and digital processing rather than unaided human sight. The distinction matters. Seeing something through instrumentation differs from perceiving it directly. The myth, however, focused on the naked eye, reinforcing the idea of immediate visibility. The cultural life of the statement extended beyond geography. It became a metaphor for magnitude, used to describe anything considered immense or historically significant. The phrase detached from physical reality and began functioning as symbolic language. Its repetition across generations ensured survival, even as scientific knowledge advanced. Educational materials once repeated the claim without verification, passing it from one source to another. Over time, correction arrived through direct experience and careful measurement. Astronaut photography, orbital observation, and a better understanding of perception from space all contributed to a quieter truth. The wall is extraordinary, but not uniquely visible from orbit. The endurance of the myth reveals how easily scale can be misunderstood. Length alone does not guarantee visibility. A thin line, even if it stretches across great distances, can disappear when viewed from far away. The human eye depends on contrast and proportion, not simply on size. The wall's grandeur is experienced most clearly on the ground, where its structure, texture, and presence become tangible. In reality, the monument's significance does not depend on cosmic visibility. Its historical impact, architectural complexity, and cultural meaning stand independently of what can be seen from orbit. It represents centuries of labor, adaptation to terrain, and the shifting priorities of dynasties. Its story unfolds across landscapes and time, not in the vacuum above the planet. The myth remains compelling because it connects human achievement to the vastness of space. It suggests continuity between Earth and orbit, between ancient construction and modern exploration. That connection feels poetic, even if it is not literal. The wall does not need to be visible from space to hold its place in history. Understanding replaces exaggeration with appreciation. The monument is immense, but its scale is best understood through proximity, through the experience of walking beside its stones and seeing how it follows the natural contours of the land. From that perspective, its magnitude becomes clear without comparison to the heavens. The story of visibility fades, and a more grounded narrative emerges. The wall is not defined by how it appears from orbit, but by how it shaped the land and the people who built and maintained it. Its presence belongs to the surface of the earth, where history leaves its marks in materials and pathways. As knowledge expands, myths like this gradually transform. They lose their certainty but retain their symbolic power. The idea of the wall being visible from space reflects admiration rather than observation, a desire to frame human effort within the scale of the planet. In that sense, the myth reveals more about human perception than about the monument itself. The truth is quieter and more precise. From space, Earth is vast and detailed, and human creations rarely dominate the view. The Great Wall remains a remarkable achievement, but its significance is not measured by orbital visibility. It endures through history, through landscape, and through memory, visible not from the edge of space, but from the long continuity of human civilization. Humans swallow spiders in their sleep. The idea that people swallow spiders in their sleep is one of the most enduring urban myths of the modern era. It appears in casual conversation, online lists of strange facts, and late-night trivia, repeated with a tone of uneasy certainty. The claim is simple and unsettling. While asleep, unaware and vulnerable, a person may accidentally ingest several spiders over the course of a lifetime. Its power lies in its vividness, creating an image that feels plausible enough to accept without evidence. The story likely emerged from a mixture of misunderstanding and experimentation with how information spreads. In the early days of internet culture, fabricated facts were sometimes used to demonstrate how easily people accept and repeat statements that sound scientific. Once introduced, the spider claim began circulating independently, detached from its original context. Over time, repetition transformed it into something resembling common knowledge. From a biological and behavioral perspective, the scenario is highly unlikely. Spiders are sensitive to vibrations and movement, relying on subtle environmental cues to detect danger. A sleeping human body produces breathing rhythms, shifts in posture, and constant micromovements. These signals typically discourage spiders rather than attract them. Approaching a large, warm, and unpredictable surface would represent risk rather than opportunity. Human sleep also provides barriers that the myth tends to ignore. Blankets, clothing, and the natural positioning of the body create physical obstacles. Even if a spider were nearby, reaching the mouth would require a series of unlikely circumstances. The mouth itself is not a passive opening. It moves, closes, and changes position throughout the night. The chances of a spider navigating such conditions without retreat are extremely small. Behavioral studies of spiders further weaken the claim. Most species avoid direct contact with large animals, preferring dark, stable environments where disturbance is minimal. Their survival depends on caution. Moving toward a human face, an area that emits heat, moisture, and carbon dioxide, would not align with typical instinctive behavior. Instead, spiders seek corners, crevices, and undisturbed surfaces. The endurance of the myth reflects the psychology of fear. Spiders occupy a unique place in human imagination, often associated with discomfort and unease. Stories involving them gain attention quickly because they trigger emotional reactions. When a statement combines fear with a sense of hidden risk, it becomes more memorable and more likely to be shared. The image of something entering the body during sleep intensifies that reaction, reinforcing its impact. Cultural repetition strengthens belief. A fact repeated across multiple sources gains familiarity, and familiarity can feel like confirmation. As the statement appears in articles, conversations, and entertainment, it begins to carry the weight of tradition rather than evidence. People recall hearing it before and assume that repeated exposure implies truth. Scientific observation offers a calmer interpretation. Encounters between sleeping humans and spiders are rare and typically uneventful. Spiders may occasionally be present in living spaces, but their behavior prioritizes safety and concealment. The interaction imagined by the myth requires a sequence of conditions that seldom occur simultaneously. The body's movements, environmental barriers, and the spider's own instincts make the scenario improbable. The myth also illustrates how imagination fills gaps in knowledge. Sleep is a state in which awareness fades, leaving space for speculation about what might happen unnoticed. Stories about unseen events carry a certain fascination because they cannot be easily verified by personal experience. This uncertainty allows dramatic possibilities to flourish. Language plays a role in the myth's survival. The claim is often presented with precise numbers or confident phrasing, giving it a tone of authority. Specificity can make a statement feel researched, even when it is not. Once attached to everyday speech, the phrase becomes a shorthand for hidden or unsettling truths, repeated more for its emotional effect than for its accuracy. Over time, the story detached from evidence and became part of digital folklore. It circulates not because people observe it, but because it evokes a reaction. The discomfort it creates ensures attention, and attention ensures repetition. Each retelling reinforces the illusion of credibility. Scientific understanding reframes the narrative. Sleep is not a state of helpless exposure but a protected biological process. The body remains responsive, adjusting position and reacting to disturbances even without conscious awareness. Spiders, in turn, remain cautious inhabitants of their environment, guided by instincts that favor avoidance rather than confrontation. The distance between myth and reality reveals how easily the human mind constructs threats from limited information. A simple image, once formed, can persist for decades. It becomes part of collective imagination, shaping perception more strongly than observation. In truth, the relationship between humans and spiders is defined more by separation than by interaction. Shared spaces do not necessarily lead to direct contact, and instinct on both sides encourages distance. The dramatic scenario described by the myth exists primarily in storytelling, not in everyday life. As the claim continues to circulate, it functions less as a statement of fact and more as a reflection of how information spreads. It demonstrates how easily fear and curiosity can transform speculation into belief. The image remains vivid, but the evidence remains absent. The story fades when examined closely. What remains is a quieter understanding. Sleep is not a moment of unnoticed intrusion, and spiders are not drawn to human vulnerability. The myth survives through repetition, while reality rests in the simple patterns of behavior that keep both humans and spiders apart. Cracking knuckles causes arthritis. The belief that cracking knuckles leads to arthritis has been passed down through generations, often delivered as a warning rather than a suggestion. It appears in family conversations, classrooms, and everyday habits, shaping behavior from childhood onward. The sound itself, sharp, sudden, and unmistakable, feels unnatural, reinforcing the idea that something harmful must be happening inside the joints. Over time, the warning became a certainty, repeated so frequently that it settled into common knowledge. Its origin is difficult to trace, but it likely grew from observation rather than evidence. The cracking sound, produced by a rapid shift within the joint, seems disruptive. Without a clear explanation, it was easy to associate the noise with damage. Painful joint conditions such as arthritis were already familiar, and linking the two created a simple cause-and-effect story that felt logical and easy to remember. Scientific understanding of the phenomenon tells a different story. The sound that occurs when knuckles are cracked is not bones grinding together or joints deteriorating. It is the result of gas bubbles forming and collapsing within the synovial fluid that lubricates the joints. When fingers are stretched or bent in a certain way, pressure inside the joint changes rapidly. This change causes dissolved gases to form bubbles, and the sudden release produces the characteristic popping sound. This process does not involve structural damage. The joints remain intact, and the surrounding tissues continue to function normally. In most cases, the sensation that follows is one of relief rather than discomfort, as tension in the joint briefly decreases. The action becomes habitual for many people, not because it harms the body, but because it provides a momentary shift in pressure and sensation. Long-term observational studies have examined whether frequent knuckle cracking leads to arthritis. Comparisons between individuals who regularly crack their knuckles and those who do not show no consistent increase in arthritis rates among habitual crackers. Joint health appears to be influenced more strongly by age, genetics, injury, and overall physical condition than by this specific habit. Arthritis itself is not a single condition but a broad category of joint disorders with different causes. Some forms develop due to immune responses, others from gradual wear, and others from injury or metabolic factors. These processes involve inflammation, cartilage breakdown, and structural changes that occur over time. The mechanism behind knuckle cracking does not align with these pathways. The persistence of the myth reveals how easily sound and sensation can shape perception. The body often communicates discomfort through noise, creaks, pops, and stiffness, and it is natural to associate unfamiliar sounds with harm. When a behavior produces a noticeable effect, people tend to assume a consequence, even without visible evidence. Cultural reinforcement strengthens the belief. Adults repeat the warning to children, not always out of scientific understanding, but from concern and habit. The statement becomes part of shared knowledge, carried forward without questioning its origin. Each repetition adds credibility, transforming a possibility into a rule. There is also a psychological element in the discomfort others feel when hearing knuckles crack. The sound can trigger unease, leading observers to interpret it as destructive. This reaction encourages the assumption that something harmful must be occurring, even when the person cracking their knuckles feels no pain. Research has explored whether frequent cracking might affect grip strength, joint swelling, or long-term mobility. Results remain largely consistent. No clear evidence connects the habit with serious joint disease. Some studies note minor, temporary effects such as slight swelling after repeated cracking, but these do not develop into chronic conditions. The human body is designed to withstand constant movement and minor stress. Joints experience pressure during everyday activities such as walking, lifting, and typing. Compared to these forces, the mechanical changes involved in knuckle cracking are relatively small. The body adapts and stabilizes, maintaining function through continuous use. The myth survives because it offers a straightforward explanation for a complex condition. Arthritis develops slowly and often without a single obvious cause. Attributing it to a visible habit provides clarity and control, even if the connection is unfounded. It transforms uncertainty into a preventable action. Over time, familiarity replaces investigation. The statement is repeated not as a hypothesis, but as established truth. It moves through generations unchanged, supported by memory rather than evidence. The more often it is heard, the more natural it feels. Scientific knowledge introduces a quieter perspective. Joint health depends on multiple factors working together: movement, nutrition, genetics, and time. The cracking sound, though dramatic, does not reflect deterioration. It is simply a physical response to pressure changes within the joint. The difference between myth and reality lies in understanding how the body functions beneath the surface. Sensations that appear alarming are often harmless, while true sources of joint disease operate gradually and invisibly. The absence of pain, inflammation, or structural damage after knuckle cracking speaks to its limited impact. The story endures because it blends concern, sound, and habit into a single narrative. It reflects the human tendency to protect the body by avoiding anything that seems disruptive. Yet careful observation replaces fear with clarity. The joints continue their work, stable and adaptable, regardless of the occasional pop. In the end, the belief remains part of cultural memory rather than medical fact. Knuckle cracking produces a sound that feels dramatic, but the body remains resilient. Arthritis follows its own pathways, shaped by deeper biological processes. And the quiet reality replaces the warning. The noise does not signal damage, only movement within a living, responsive system. Bulls hate the color red. The belief that bulls are enraged by the color red is one of the most recognizable images in popular culture. It appears in cartoons, films, and everyday metaphors, reinforcing the idea that a simple color can provoke a powerful animal into immediate aggression. The image is dramatic and easy to understand. A red cloth waved before a bull, followed by a sudden charge. Over time, the scene became accepted not just as tradition, but as biological truth. The origins of this belief are closely tied to the spectacle of bullfighting. In the arena, a matador uses a red cape, creating a visual symbol that feels central to the animal's reaction. Observers naturally associate the bull's movement with the color itself, interpreting the charge as a direct response. The repeated pairing of red fabric and aggressive behavior strengthened the impression, turning a performance element into a widely accepted explanation. Scientific understanding of bovine vision presents a different reality. Bulls, like other cattle, do not perceive color in the same way humans do. Their vision is limited in distinguishing certain wavelengths, particularly those associated with red and green. To a bull, a red cape does not appear as a vivid signal. It registers more as a muted shade, similar to gray or brown, blending into the broader visual field. What triggers the bull's reaction is not the color, but movement. Sudden motion captures attention and signals potential threat or challenge. When a cloth is waved rapidly, it creates shifting shapes and changes in position that stimulate the animal's instinct to respond. The bull reacts to the dynamics of the environment rather than to a specific hue. The same response would occur if the fabric were white, blue, or any other color, provided it moved in a similar way. Animal behavior supports this interpretation. Bulls respond to gestures, proximity, and the energy of their surroundings. Their reactions depend on instinctive patterns shaped by evolution, where movement often indicates danger or competition. In open environments, large animals rely on detecting motion quickly to protect themselves and assert dominance. The visual cue of a moving object becomes far more significant than its color. The persistence of the myth reflects the power of symbolism. Red has long been associated with intensity, danger, and emotion in human culture. Linking the color to aggression feels natural, even when biology does not support the connection. The dramatic contrast between the red cape and the neutral tones of the arena enhances the visual experience, reinforcing the illusion that the color itself holds meaning for the animal. Tradition also plays a role. Bullfighting developed over centuries, and its visual elements became fixed through repetition. The red cape serves practical purposes, helping conceal stains and providing clear visibility for the audience. Over time, practicality blended with storytelling, and the object took on symbolic significance beyond its original function. Language helped cement the belief. Phrases describing anger or provocation often reference the image of waving red before a bull, turning it into a metaphor for triggering conflict. Each use strengthens the association, embedding the idea deeper into everyday thought. The metaphor survives even when its biological basis is absent. Scientific observation offers a quieter explanation. Bulls respond to their environment through instinct and perception shaped by survival. Movement signals intention. Posture communicates threat. Proximity determines reaction. Color, in this context, plays a minimal role. The dramatic charge seen in the arena is the result of motion, training, and environment rather than visual sensitivity to red. The human mind often prefers simple explanations for complex behavior. Assigning aggression to a single color creates a clear narrative that is easy to repeat. It reduces a dynamic interaction to a single cause, transforming instinct into symbolism. Over time, the simplified version becomes more familiar than the underlying reality. Understanding replaces the myth with a more grounded perspective. Bulls do not target red because they cannot perceive it as humans do. Their reactions arise from movement and the energy of the moment. The cloth becomes significant not because of its shade, but because of how it moves through space and challenges the animal's awareness. The image of red provoking rage remains powerful because it is visually striking and culturally reinforced. It tells a story that feels immediate and dramatic. Yet beneath the surface lies a different truth, one rooted in biology rather than symbolism. The bull reacts to motion, to presence, to instinct, not to color. As knowledge evolves, the narrative shifts from spectacle to understanding. The arena scene remains dramatic, but its meaning changes. The red cape is no longer a trigger of anger, but a tool within a carefully constructed performance. The animal's behavior follows patterns shaped by perception and environment, not by the emotional weight humans assign to color. The myth endures because it blends visual intensity with emotional expectation. It turns instinct into symbolism and behavior into narrative. But when examined closely, the explanation becomes simpler and more precise. The bull does not hate red. It responds to movement, to challenge, and to the shifting signals of its surroundings. In that clarity, the story transforms. What once seemed like a reaction to color becomes an example of how perception works in the animal world. The charge is not driven by hue, but by motion and instinct. And the myth, though vivid, gives way to a quieter understanding of how behavior truly unfolds. Napoleon was extremely short. The image of Napoleon as an unusually short man has become one of the most persistent historical misconceptions. It appears in caricatures, literature, and everyday language, often used as a symbol of ambition compensating for physical stature. Over time, the phrase Napoleon complex entered popular speech, reinforcing the idea that his leadership and personality were shaped by a lack of height. The story feels convincing because it simplifies a complex figure into a single, memorable trait. In reality, the physical stature of Napoleon Bonaparte was not extraordinary for his era. Historical records suggest he stood around 5 feet 6 to 5 feet 7 inches tall by modern measurements, which placed him close to the average height of French men in the late 18th and early 19th centuries. The confusion began partly due to differences between French and British systems of measurement. French inches were slightly longer than British ones, and when his height was recorded and later translated, it appeared smaller than it actually was. Political rivalry also contributed to the myth. During the Napoleonic Wars, British propaganda frequently portrayed him as small and physically unimpressive. Satirical drawings exaggerated his proportions, placing him beside towering enemies or depicting him with oversized clothing. These images were designed to undermine his authority and reduce the image of a powerful military leader into something comical and manageable. Repetition ensured that the visual stereotype spread quickly and endured long after the conflicts ended. The contrast between Napoleon and his imperial guard further shaped perception. The guard consisted of carefully selected soldiers, many of whom were taller than average. When Napoleon stood among them, the difference created a striking visual effect. Observers interpreted this contrast as evidence of his supposed shortness, even though the comparison was selective and misleading. In everyday settings, his height would not have appeared unusual. Historical portraits and sculptures also played a role. Artists often emphasized symbolic features over physical accuracy, shaping public perception through composition and proportion. Some depictions presented him with broader shoulders and a commanding posture, while others leaned into the popular caricature of a smaller figure commanding vast armies. The mixture of artistic interpretation and political messaging blurred the line between reality and representation. The persistence of the myth reflects how easily physical traits become tied to personality. Napoleon's intensity, discipline, and ambition encouraged observers to search for a defining physical explanation. Height provided a convenient narrative. It allowed people to interpret his determination as compensation, transforming leadership into psychology and psychology into stereotype. Over time, this interpretation became more familiar than the historical record. Language reinforced the association. The idea that shorter individuals seek power to counterbalance perceived limitations entered cultural conversation, often detached from the actual person who inspired it. The term linked his name permanently with a theory about behavior, even though the foundation of that theory rested on an inaccurate assumption about his stature. Scientific and historical analysis gradually clarified the misunderstanding. Examination of uniforms, medical records, and contemporary descriptions confirmed that Napoleon's proportions were typical for his time. The myth persisted not because of evidence, but because it had become embedded in storytelling. Once a narrative becomes culturally useful, it continues to circulate regardless of accuracy. The fascination with height also reflects broader human tendencies. Physical characteristics are easy to observe and easy to compare, making them convenient anchors for interpretation. Complex achievements such as military strategy or political reform are more difficult to summarize. Reducing a historical figure to a visible trait creates a simpler story, one that can be repeated quickly and remembered easily. In Napoleon's case, this simplification overshadowed the reality of his presence. Contemporary accounts describe a leader with strong posture, steady gaze, and an ability to command attention in a room. Authority did not emerge from height but from confidence, communication, and strategic clarity. These qualities shaped how others perceived him, often more strongly than physical measurements. The myth endures because it connects visual imagination with historical drama. A small figure leading vast armies creates a striking contrast, one that feels symbolic of determination against odds. The story satisfies a narrative instinct, even as it distances itself from fact. Each retelling strengthens the association, reinforcing an image that becomes harder to question over time. Closer examination replaces exaggeration with proportion. Napoleon appears not as an anomaly, but as a man shaped by the standards of his era. His height becomes a minor detail within a larger historical context, rather than a defining characteristic. The focus shifts from physical scale to the scope of his influence and the complexity of his leadership. The transformation of his image illustrates how myths form around recognizable details. A misunderstanding in measurement, combined with political satire and cultural repetition, created a lasting narrative. The simplicity of the claim ensured its survival, even as evidence pointed elsewhere. In the quiet space between myth and reality, the figure of Napoleon changes. The exaggerated image fades, and a more balanced portrait emerges, one grounded in historical context rather than caricature. His presence was not defined by being unusually short, but by the scale of his actions and the intensity of his vision. The story remains a reminder of how easily perception can shape memory. A single repeated idea can overshadow facts, turning assumption into identity. Yet when examined carefully, the narrative shifts. Napoleon was not extraordinarily small. The myth, though vivid, reflects more about cultural storytelling than about the man himself. Sugar makes children hyperactive. The belief that sugar makes children hyperactive has become one of the most familiar ideas in modern parenting. It appears in family advice, school discussions, and everyday routines, shaping how adults interpret children's behavior after sweets, parties, or celebrations. The pattern feels obvious. A child consumes sugar, energy rises, and restlessness follows. Over time, this sequence became accepted as a direct cause and effect relationship, reinforced by repetition rather than careful observation. The origins of this idea developed gradually through cultural experience. Sugary foods are often associated with emotionally stimulating environments, birthdays, holidays, gatherings, and rewards. These moments naturally involve excitement, noise, and social interaction. Children in such settings tend to move more, speak louder, and react more intensely. Sugar became linked with these behaviors because it was present during the same moments, even though the surrounding environment played a much larger role. Scientific research offers a more nuanced perspective. Controlled studies comparing children who consume sugar with those who do not have found no consistent evidence that sugar alone increases hyperactivity. In many cases, behavior remained similar regardless of intake. What changed more noticeably was adult perception. When parents believed their children had consumed sugar, they were more likely to interpret normal energetic behavior as hyperactivity. This difference between expectation and observation highlights the influence of perception. Adults often anticipate a reaction and then notice behaviors that confirm it. Running, talking, or laughing may appear more intense when interpreted through the lens of sugar consumption. The same behaviors in another context might pass without comment. The belief shapes interpretation, and interpretation reinforces the belief. Physiologically, sugar does provide energy, but the process is gradual. After consumption, glucose enters the bloodstream and becomes available for use by cells. The body regulates this process through hormones that stabilize energy levels rather than produce sudden bursts of activity. The sensation of a rapid rush often reflects emotional excitement or anticipation rather than metabolic change. Children's behavior is influenced by many overlapping factors. Sleep quality, emotional state, environment, and social interaction all contribute to how they move and respond. A child at a celebration may be reacting to music, attention, and novelty. Movement becomes an expression of engagement rather than a direct result of what was eaten. When sugar is present during these experiences, it becomes an easy explanation for a much broader set of influences. The persistence of the myth reflects the human tendency to seek simple causes for complex behavior. Energy in children can appear unpredictable, and linking it to a visible factor like food creates a sense of control. Limiting sugar feels like a clear action that can prevent restlessness. This clarity makes the idea appealing, even when scientific evidence does not fully support it. Cultural reinforcement strengthens the narrative. Advice shared between generations often carries authority through familiarity rather than verification. When parents repeat what they were once told, the statement gains continuity. Over time, the belief becomes part of everyday language, shaping expectations before behavior even occurs. Research into childhood development emphasizes the importance of context. Children are naturally energetic, especially in stimulating environments. Movement supports learning, exploration, and emotional expression. Labeling this activity as a chemical reaction oversimplifies a complex developmental process. Behavior reflects curiosity and engagement as much as physiology. There are also situations where sugar intake coincides with emotional reward. Receiving sweets often accompanies praise, celebration, or relaxation of rules. These moments signal freedom and enjoyment, encouraging more expressive behavior. The association forms not between sugar and hyperactivity, but between celebration and energy. The food becomes a symbol within a larger emotional experience. The myth endures because it aligns with everyday observation at a surface level. The sequence appears logical, and repetition makes it feel reliable. Yet deeper examination reveals a more layered interaction between environment, expectation, and perception. Behavior that seems chemically driven often emerges from social and emotional context. Scientific understanding reframes the narrative without dismissing parental experience. Children do respond to what they eat, but not always in immediate or dramatic ways. Energy levels fluctuate gradually, and emotional surroundings often play a stronger role than nutrition in shaping short-term behavior. Hyperactivity, when it occurs, usually involves patterns linked to development, temperament, or environment rather than a single ingredient. The image of sugar as a trigger for restlessness remains vivid because it provides a clear story. It transforms everyday chaos into a manageable explanation. Yet the real picture is quieter and more complex. Children respond to the world around them to attention, stimulation, and interaction. Their energy reflects engagement rather than chemical reaction alone. As awareness grows, the belief shifts from certainty to perspective. Sugar becomes one factor among many, not a defining cause. Behavior is understood as the result of overlapping influences, each shaping how a child moves, reacts, and expresses excitement. In this understanding, the myth softens. The connection between sweets and hyperactivity fades into a broader view of childhood energy. What once appeared as a direct trigger becomes part of a larger pattern, where environment, emotion, and expectation guide behavior more strongly than sugar itself. You must drink 8 glasses of water a day. The idea that every person must drink 8 glasses of water a day has become one of the most recognizable health rules in modern life. It appears in wellness advice, advertisements, and daily routines, presented as a simple guideline for staying healthy. The number feels precise and universal, easy to remember and easy to follow. Over time, it transformed from a suggestion into a perceived requirement, shaping how people think about hydration. The origins of this rule are less certain than its popularity suggests. Early nutritional recommendations emphasized the importance of water for bodily function, noting that the human body depends on fluid balance to regulate temperature, transport nutrients, and remove waste. At some point, a general estimate of daily fluid needs was simplified into a fixed quantity, and the nuance that fluids come from multiple sources gradually disappeared. The guideline remained, detached from its original context. Human hydration is not governed by a single number. The body maintains balance through a dynamic system that responds to activity, climate, diet, and individual physiology. Thirst functions as a biological signal, guiding intake when the body requires more fluid. This process operates continuously, adjusting to changes in environment and behavior rather than following a rigid schedule. Water enters the body in more ways than drinking alone. Many foods contain significant amounts of fluid, including fruits, vegetables, soups, and prepared meals. These sources contribute to overall hydration, reducing the need for a fixed quantity of plain water. The 8-glass rule often overlooks this contribution, focusing only on beverages while ignoring the broader nutritional picture. Physical activity influences fluid needs as well. Movement increases body temperature and perspiration, leading to greater fluid loss. In these conditions, intake naturally rises. In cooler environments or during periods of rest, the body requires less. Hydration adjusts to context, shaped by conditions rather than predetermined amounts. The persistence of the 8-glass guideline reflects the appeal of clarity. Health advice that offers a simple number feels actionable and reassuring. It removes uncertainty and replaces it with routine, Measuring water intake becomes a visible way to feel responsible for personal well-being. The rule's simplicity helps it spread quickly, even when the science behind it is more flexible. Cultural repetition reinforces the idea. Wellness campaigns, workplace habits, and social media challenges often encourage people to track water consumption using the same number. Each repetition strengthens the impression that it is a universal requirement rather than a general suggestion. The guideline becomes part of everyday language, rarely questioned. Scientific understanding emphasizes variability instead of uniformity. Hydration depends on body size, metabolism, health status, and environment. Some individuals naturally drink more, others less, and both patterns can remain healthy. The body's internal regulation manages fluid balance effectively in most situations, using thirst and kidney function to maintain stability. The human body is remarkably efficient at signaling its needs. Dryness in the mouth, subtle fatigue, and changes in concentration can prompt fluid intake. These cues guide behavior more accurately than fixed schedules. Drinking when thirsty aligns with biological rhythms rather than external instructions. The myth persists because it aligns with the broader desire for structured health habits. People often seek concrete steps that promise improvement. A daily target creates a sense of progress and control. The act of drinking becomes symbolic of care and discipline, reinforcing the belief even when the exact number lacks universal relevance. Over time, the guideline shifted from flexibility to obligation. Individuals began to measure success by reaching a specific quantity, sometimes overlooking the body's natural signals. Hydration became something to manage rather than something to experience. The number remained, while the context faded. Scientific perspectives restore that context. The body does not operate according to a fixed daily quota. It adapts, responds, and balances. Fluid needs change with temperature, movement, diet, and personal health. The 8-glass figure represents a rough approximation, not a universal rule. Understanding this replaces rigidity with awareness. Hydration becomes an ongoing process guided by sensation and environment. Water remains essential, but the way it is consumed varies naturally from person to person. What matters is balance over time rather than adherence to a specific count. The endurance of the myth reflects how easily numbers become truths when repeated often enough. Precision gives the impression of authority, and authority encourages trust. Yet the human body follows patterns more complex than a single guideline can capture. Its needs shift quietly, responding to conditions moment by moment. In the space between myth and reality, a calmer understanding emerges. Drinking water supports health, but not through strict numerical targets. The body communicates, adjusts, and maintains equilibrium through signals refined over time. Listening to those signals offers a more reliable guide than memorizing a number. The story of the 8 glasses remains part of modern wellness culture, simple and familiar. But beneath that simplicity lies a deeper process, one shaped by adaptation and balance. Hydration is not a fixed requirement repeated every day in the same way. It is a living interaction between body and environment, guided by need rather than rule. Hair and nails continue to grow after death. The belief that hair and nails continue to grow after death is one of the most widely accepted biological myths. It appears in everyday conversation, documentaries, and fictional storytelling, often used to create an unsettling sense of what happens to the human body after life ends. The image is vivid and memorable, a body at rest, while parts of it continue their silent development. Over time, this idea became embedded in popular understanding, repeated so often that it feels self-evident. The origin of this belief lies in visual observation rather than biological fact. In the period following death, the body undergoes physical changes as it begins to dehydrate. Skin loses moisture and gradually retracts, particularly around the fingers, toes, and face. As the skin tightens and pulls back, it exposes more of the hair shafts and nail beds that were already present. This exposure creates the illusion of growth, even though no new material is being produced. Biologically, growth requires active cellular processes. Hair and nails develop through living cells that divide, metabolize nutrients, and respond to hormonal signals. These processes depend on oxygen and energy supplied through the bloodstream. After death, circulation stops. Oxygen no longer reaches tissues, and cells quickly lose the ability to function. Without this metabolic activity, true growth becomes impossible. The human body transitions from a state of maintenance to one of gradual breakdown. Cells begin to deteriorate, tissues lose structure, and chemical processes shift. The apparent lengthening of nails and hair is not a continuation of life but a consequence of dehydration and contraction. The change is external and visual rather than biological. The persistence of the myth reflects how easily perception can be mistaken for process. When people observe a body over time, the contrast between earlier and later appearance creates the impression of movement or development. Without knowledge of underlying mechanisms, the simplest explanation becomes the most convincing. Growth seems like a natural conclusion, even when the body no longer supports it. Cultural storytelling reinforced the idea. In literature and film, the notion of continued growth after death adds emotional intensity and mystery. It suggests a lingering connection between life and stillness, a boundary that appears less absolute. These images remain powerful, and repetition through media strengthens the belief, even when scientific understanding offers a different explanation. Historical misconceptions also contributed. In earlier centuries, limited knowledge of cellular biology left many bodily changes unexplained. Observations were interpreted through visible outcomes rather than internal mechanisms. The exposed nail beds and hair roots seemed like evidence of ongoing development, and the explanation persisted across generations. Scientific research into decomposition clarified the process. As the body loses moisture, skin shrinks and pulls away from underlying structures. The same effect occurs in other tissues, altering appearance without creating new growth. What seems like extension is simply exposure. The body is not producing anything new. It is revealing what was already there. The difference between growth and appearance becomes central to understanding the myth. Growth requires energy, nutrients, and living cells working in coordination. Appearance can change through physical forces alone: drying, contraction, and the shifting of tissues. In the absence of life, only the latter occurs. The emotional dimension of death also shapes interpretation. People often search for signs that suggest continuity, something that blurs the finality of the moment. The idea that parts of the body continue to grow provides a subtle sense of persistence, even if it is rooted in misunderstanding. It transforms stillness into motion, creating a narrative that feels less abrupt. Repetition plays a powerful role in maintaining the myth. The statement is easy to remember and visually compelling. Each retelling reinforces familiarity, and familiarity creates acceptance. Over time, the explanation becomes secondary to the image itself, which carries its own persuasive force. Scientific understanding introduces a quieter perspective. After death, the body enters a natural process governed by physical and chemical change. There is no continuation of growth, only transformation. Hair and nails remain as they were at the moment life ended, while the surrounding tissues shift and recede. The myth illustrates how the human mind interprets change. Visible differences invite explanation, and simple answers often take root first. The illusion of growth emerges from observation, not from biological activity. Once established, it continues to circulate, sustained by memory and imagination. In reality, the boundary between life and death remains clear at the cellular level. Growth ceases when the systems that support it stop functioning. The body transitions from maintenance to stillness, from activity to gradual decomposition. The apparent lengthening of hair and nails is part of this transition, not a continuation of life. As knowledge deepens, the narrative changes. What once seemed mysterious becomes understandable through the processes of dehydration and tissue contraction. The visual effect remains, but its meaning shifts from growth to exposure. The illusion fades, replaced by a clearer view of what occurs beneath the surface. The endurance of the myth reflects the power of observation shaped by emotion. It shows how easily appearances can guide belief when the underlying mechanisms remain unseen. Yet careful examination replaces uncertainty with clarity. Hair and nails do not continue to grow after death. What changes is the skin, the moisture, and the way the body presents what was already there. In this understanding, the story becomes less about lingering life and more about natural transformation. The body follows its own quiet path, governed by physical processes rather than biological continuation. The myth, though vivid, gives way to a calmer reality, one in which growth belongs only to the living, and appearance tells a different, more subtle story. Lightning never strikes the same place twice. The belief that lightning never strikes the same place twice has been repeated for generations as a statement of reassurance. It appears in everyday language, often used metaphorically to suggest that rare or dangerous events are unlikely to happen again in the same location. The phrase carries a sense of comfort, implying that once a place has experienced a lightning strike, it is somehow protected from future danger. Over time, this idea became widely accepted, even though it does not reflect how lightning actually behaves. The origin of the myth likely comes from how unpredictable lightning appears to human observers. Storms move quickly, strikes occur suddenly, and the same exact point is rarely observed being hit twice in immediate succession. From this perspective, lightning seems random and unlikely to repeat itself in the same spot. Without continuous observation or long-term measurement, the impression of uniqueness became an assumption of impossibility. In reality, lightning frequently strikes the same place more than once, especially if that location provides favorable conditions. Lightning is drawn to tall, isolated, or conductive structures, objects that offer the easiest path for electrical discharge between cloud and ground. Skyscrapers, towers, and mountain peaks are particularly vulnerable because they extend upward into the atmosphere and reduce the distance electricity must travel. Some structures are struck repeatedly during the same storm. Tall buildings often experience multiple hits because they remain prominent targets while electrical activity continues overhead. The physical properties that attract lightning do not disappear after the first strike. Height, conductivity, and exposure continue to guide where energy travels, making repeated strikes not only possible but common. Natural landscapes show similar patterns. Elevated terrain, ridges, and open fields can attract lightning again and again over time. The atmosphere does not remember previous strikes, nor does it avoid them. Each discharge follows the path of least resistance at that moment, shaped by electrical charge, air conditions, and geography. If a location remains favorable, it may be struck repeatedly across storms and seasons. Scientific observation has confirmed this behavior through long-term monitoring. Lightning detection systems record patterns showing that certain areas and structures receive frequent strikes. These patterns are consistent and predictable, influenced by environmental factors rather than chance alone. The myth fades when measured against this data, replaced by an understanding of how electricity interacts with the physical world. The persistence of the belief reflects a natural human desire to find order and reassurance in unpredictable events. Lightning represents danger and uncertainty. The idea that it will not return to the same place provides psychological comfort, suggesting a limit to risk. It transforms randomness into a rule, making the threat feel more manageable. Language helped reinforce the myth. The phrase became a metaphor applied to life events, implying that extraordinary situations rarely repeat. In this context, it functions symbolically rather than scientifically. Its survival depends less on accuracy and more on its usefulness in conversation and storytelling. Visual perception also contributes to the misunderstanding. Lightning strikes last only fractions of a second, and observing exact repetition is difficult without specialized equipment. A location struck once may appear untouched afterward, leaving no obvious mark. Without visible evidence, the idea of a repeated strike feels abstract and unlikely. Scientific understanding offers a clearer perspective. Lightning follows physical laws, moving through conductive paths and responding to atmospheric conditions. It does not recognize places or avoid them. Each strike forms based on electrical potential and environmental structure. If those conditions remain similar, the same path can be used again. The human tendency to interpret rare events as unique plays a role as well. When something dramatic happens, it is often remembered as singular and unrepeatable. Over time, memory transforms observation into principle. The absence of immediate repetition strengthens belief, even when long-term patterns suggest otherwise. In practice, many lightning protection systems are built around the expectation of repeated strikes. Lightning rods, grounding networks, and structural reinforcements exist precisely because certain locations are likely to be hit more than once. These systems acknowledge the reality that lightning does return to familiar paths when conditions allow. The myth endures because it offers simplicity. It replaces complex atmospheric behavior with a clear statement that feels intuitive. The idea is easy to remember and easy to repeat, making it part of everyday language long after scientific evidence has clarified the truth. In reality, lightning is guided by physics rather than probability alone. The same place can be struck repeatedly, sometimes within minutes, sometimes across years. The path is determined by height, conductivity, and the distribution of electrical charge in the atmosphere. Understanding this shifts the narrative from reassurance to awareness. Lightning is not selective in avoiding past targets. It follows opportunity, moving where resistance is lowest and conditions are right. Locations that once attracted a strike may continue to do so. The phrase remains powerful as metaphor, but less so as fact. It reflects how humans try to interpret unpredictable forces through simple rules. Yet the atmosphere operates according to its own principles, indifferent to previous events. In that recognition, the myth dissolves into a clearer understanding. Lightning does strike the same place more than once, not as an exception, but as part of the natural patterns that govern storms, electricity, and the movement of energy across the sky. Vikings wore horned helmets. The image of Vikings wearing horned helmets is one of the most recognizable portrayals of the ancient Norse world. It appears in films, illustrations, sports logos, and popular imagination, shaping how people visualize seafaring warriors from Northern Europe. The silhouette is dramatic and unmistakable. A helmet crowned with curved horns, symbolizing ferocity and strength. Over time, this image became so familiar that it was accepted as historical reality rather than artistic invention. Archaeological evidence tells a different story. No confirmed Viking-era battle helmets with horns have been discovered in burial sites, settlements, or preserved artifacts from the period. Helmets that have been found are practical in design, rounded, reinforced, and built for protection. Their shapes reflect functionality rather than decoration, prioritizing durability and mobility in combat. The misconception likely formed long after the Viking Age ended. In the 19th century, interest in Norse mythology and medieval history surged across Europe. Artists, writers, and stage designers sought striking visuals to represent ancient warriors. Horns, already associated with power and symbolism in earlier ritual objects, were added to helmets to create a dramatic and memorable appearance. These designs captured attention and quickly spread through cultural works. One of the strongest influences came from theatrical costume design, particularly in productions inspired by Norse legends. Designers emphasized spectacle over accuracy, crafting bold shapes that could be recognized instantly by audiences. The horned helmet became a visual shorthand for the Viking identity, reinforcing the image through repeated performances and illustrations. From the stage, the design moved into paintings, books, and eventually film and television. Practical considerations also challenged the idea of horned helmets in battle. Horns would have created imbalance and vulnerability, catching on weapons, shields, and movement. Combat required efficiency and protection, not ornamentation that could hinder reaction or visibility. Historical armor reflects this need for practicality, focusing on reinforced metal and simple forms that could withstand impact. Earlier cultures did use horned headgear in ceremonial or symbolic contexts. These items were not intended for warfare but for ritual display, representing status or spiritual meaning. Over time, the visual association between horns and ancient societies blurred distinctions between ceremonial artifacts and Viking combat equipment. The merging of these ideas helped shape the myth. The persistence of the image reflects the power of visual storytelling. A horned helmet transforms a warrior into a symbol, making the figure appear larger than life. The design communicates intensity and identity in a single glance. Once established, such imagery becomes difficult to replace, even when historical research provides more accurate representations. Cultural repetition strengthened the belief. Illustrations in textbooks, comics, and advertisements reinforced the same visual pattern across generations. Each appearance added familiarity, and familiarity encouraged acceptance. The design became part of collective memory, shaping how people imagine the past even without direct evidence. Historical understanding gradually clarified the reality of Viking equipment. Excavations and preserved artifacts revealed a culture skilled in shipbuilding, metalwork, and strategy. Their armor reflected these priorities: functional, adaptable, and suited to varied environments. Helmets were rare and valuable, often simple in design and intended to protect rather than impress. The fascination with horns also reflects deeper symbolic associations. Horns have long represented strength, authority, and connection to the natural world. Adding them to Viking imagery created a sense of mythic power, linking historical figures with legendary qualities. The visual exaggeration transformed real people into archetypes, blending history with imagination. The myth endured because it was visually compelling and easy to reproduce. A horned helmet stands out immediately, while an accurate Viking helmet appears modest by comparison. In visual media, clarity and impact often outweigh precision. The dramatic version spreads faster and remains more memorable. As historical knowledge expanded, the contrast between myth and reality became clearer. Scholars, archaeologists, and historians emphasized the absence of evidence for horned battle helmets. The Viking image shifted gradually toward authenticity, showing warriors equipped with practical armor and shields. Yet the older depiction remained embedded in popular culture. The transformation illustrates how easily visual inventions can become accepted truth. A design created for artistic effect can outlive its origin and reshape understanding of an entire culture. The horned helmet was never a standard part of Viking warfare, but it became a defining symbol through repetition and imagination. In reality, Viking identity was shaped by exploration, trade, craftsmanship, and adaptation to harsh environments. Their legacy lies in navigation, settlement, and cultural exchange rather than in theatrical armor. The absence of horns in their equipment reveals a society guided by function and survival rather than spectacle. The myth remains powerful because it captures attention and emotion. It turns history into iconography, simplifying a complex culture into a single visual. Yet behind that image lies a quieter truth. Viking warriors wore helmets built for protection, not decoration. Understanding this restores balance between imagination and evidence. The horned helmet belongs to art, theater, and storytelling, not to the battlefields of the Viking Age. The real figures who sailed across northern seas carried tools shaped by necessity, not by myth. In that distinction, the story becomes clearer. Vikings did not wear horned helmets in combat. The image that endures is a creation of later centuries, a symbol born from creativity rather than history. And as knowledge deepens, the silhouette changes, from dramatic horns to the practical forms that once faced the wind, the sea, and the realities of their time. The chameleon changes color to match its surroundings. For many years, the image of a chameleon blending perfectly into any background has lived in popular imagination as a symbol of perfect camouflage. The belief is simple and intuitive. A chameleon changes its color to match whatever it touches or sees. Green leaves, brown bark, yellow sand. The animal becomes part of the environment, almost invisible. This idea appears in documentaries, cartoons, schoolbooks, and casual conversation. Feels natural, even obvious. Yet the true mechanism behind a chameleon's color change is far more complex and far more fascinating. Chameleons do not primarily change color to match their surroundings. Their transformation is driven by communication, mood, temperature regulation, and physiological responses. Camouflage is only a secondary effect in certain situations, not the central purpose. The misunderstanding comes from observing a visible outcome and assuming a simple intention behind it. The skin of a chameleon contains specialized cells arranged in multiple layers. These include chromatophores, which contain pigments, and iridophores, which reflect light using microscopic crystal structures. By expanding or contracting these cells, the chameleon can shift how light interacts with its skin. This process changes not only pigment visibility but also how wavelengths of light are reflected, producing variations in brightness and color. The result is not a direct copying of the environment but a dynamic biological display. When a chameleon feels threatened, excited, territorial, or ready to mate, its nervous system triggers rapid adjustments in these skin cells. Colors may become darker, brighter, or more contrasting. Patterns may emerge. The animal is signaling information rather than hiding. Emotional state plays a major role. Stress often leads to darker tones. Calmness produces softer greens. Aggression can bring bold contrasts, stripes, or flashes of yellow and orange. In social encounters, color becomes a language. One chameleon can communicate dominance, submission, readiness, or warning without sound or movement. Temperature also influences color. Darker tones absorb more heat from sunlight, helping the reptile warm its body. Lighter tones reflect heat, preventing overheating. This thermoregulatory function is essential for survival, especially in environments where temperature fluctuates rapidly between day and night. Because chameleons often live in environments filled with foliage, branches, and shifting light, their natural color palette already aligns with greens, browns, and muted tones. When their mood or physiological state changes, these colors may coincidentally resemble the surrounding environment. To an observer, it appears as intentional camouflage, but in reality, the environment is not being matched in a conscious or direct sense. Some species demonstrate stronger camouflage abilities than others, but even in those cases, the process is not based on visual imitation. Chameleons do not scan a surface and replicate its color. Their eyes, while highly mobile and capable of independent movement, are not used for color sampling in the way cameras or sensors might operate. Instead, internal signals determine the change, not visual copying. The myth persists because it simplifies a complex biological process into a familiar narrative. Humans naturally interpret animal behavior through intention. When a creature changes color near a green leaf and becomes green itself, the mind assumes a deliberate strategy. The truth is less theatrical but more intricate, a combination of physics, biology, and neurological control working in harmony. This misunderstanding also reflects how often natural phenomena are reduced to single explanations. The idea of perfect camouflage is dramatic and memorable. It fits storytelling and education, but nature rarely operates through a single purpose. Adaptations usually serve multiple roles simultaneously: survival, communication, regulation, and reproduction intertwined. Chameleons evolved their color-changing ability over millions of years. It allowed them to interact socially without noise, avoid unnecessary conflict, regulate body heat efficiently, and respond instantly to environmental stress. Camouflage emerged as one advantage among many, not the defining goal. Observing a chameleon closely reveals this complexity. The change is rarely instant. It unfolds gradually, influenced by posture, lighting, and emotional state. Patterns ripple across the skin. Colors deepen and soften. The transformation feels less like disappearance and more like expression. In this way, the chameleon is not a creature that hides from the world by becoming it. It is a creature that communicates with the world through its skin. Its color shifts are messages, adjustments, and responses, a living system reacting to internal and external signals at the same time. The persistence of the myth shows how easily visible behavior can be misinterpreted. What appears as imitation is often interaction. What seems like camouflage is often communication. The chameleon does not simply blend in. It responds, adapts, and signals using a biological mechanism that is both subtle and sophisticated. Understanding this transforms the animal from a symbol of disguise into a symbol of responsiveness. Its colors are not a mask but a language written in light and pigment. And once seen this way, the familiar image of a chameleon quietly fading into the background becomes something deeper, not a trick of survival, but a reflection of life constantly adjusting, signaling, and balancing itself within its environment. Einstein failed math in school. The idea that Albert Einstein struggled with mathematics as a student has become one of the most persistent and comforting stories about genius. It suggests that even the greatest scientific mind once failed in the very subject that would later define his legacy. The message feels reassuring. Brilliance can emerge from weakness, and early academic difficulty does not determine the future. Yet this widely repeated belief is not supported by historical evidence. From an early age, Einstein demonstrated a strong aptitude for mathematics. School records and personal accounts show that he mastered algebra and geometry at a level far beyond his classmates. By the age of 12, he was independently studying advanced mathematical concepts and working through complex problems. Numbers and logical structures did not intimidate him. They fascinated him. The myth likely originated from confusion about the educational system in which he studied. In Switzerland and parts of Germany at the time, grading scales were different from what many people expect today. In some systems, a lower number represented the highest achievement. When these records were later interpreted without context, it appeared as if he had received poor marks. In reality, he was performing at the top of his class in mathematics. There was one moment often cited as evidence of academic failure. Einstein did not pass the entrance examination for the Swiss Federal Polytechnic on his first attempt. This detail, repeated without explanation, helped shape the narrative. But the reality was more nuanced. At the time, he was younger than most applicants and had not yet completed the equivalent level of secondary education. His scores in mathematics and physics were exceptionally high. The areas where he struggled were language, biology, and other general subjects unrelated to his scientific strengths. He later returned, completed his preparatory education, and passed the exams successfully. The temporary setback did not reflect a weakness in mathematics but rather a mismatch between his age, academic preparation, and the broader curriculum required at the time. Einstein's relationship with formal schooling was complicated, but not because he lacked ability. He often found rigid teaching methods uninspiring and preferred independent study. Memorization and strict discipline did not appeal to him. He was drawn instead to conceptual understanding, asking how and why, imagining systems, and exploring ideas beyond the classroom. This preference sometimes created friction with teachers, who interpreted his independence as disengagement. Over time, the distinction between disliking school structure and failing academically became blurred in public retellings. A student who questioned authority and preferred self-guided learning was gradually transformed into a student who could not succeed in traditional subjects. The narrative became simpler, easier to remember, and emotionally satisfying. The myth also persists because it reinforces a powerful cultural belief that intelligence is hidden, misunderstood, or unrecognized in early life. Stories of overlooked potential resonate deeply. They suggest that greatness can grow quietly, even in environments that do not fully understand it. In this sense, the tale about Einstein functions more as inspiration than as historical fact. But the truth is more consistent and less dramatic. Einstein was not a poor mathematics student who later became brilliant. He was a mathematically gifted child who developed into an extraordinary thinker through curiosity, persistence, and imagination. His later breakthroughs were built on foundations laid early, strengthened by years of independent study and deep reflection. Understanding this does not make his achievements less impressive. On the contrary, it reveals the continuity of his development. His theories did not appear suddenly or in defiance of weakness. They emerged from a lifetime of engagement with numbers, patterns, and physical reality. His mind moved comfortably through abstraction because it had been trained to do so from a young age. The persistence of the myth highlights how easily stories reshape facts over time. A misunderstanding of grading systems, a single failed entrance attempt, and his unconventional personality combined into a narrative that feels emotionally true even if historically inaccurate. Repetition transformed it into common knowledge. Looking closely at the historical record dissolves the illusion. The image of Einstein struggling with basic arithmetic fades, replaced by the image of a young student deeply absorbed in mathematical ideas, exploring them with patience and curiosity. His path was not defined by failure in the subject he later revolutionized. It was defined by early strength, sustained interest, and a lifelong commitment to understanding the structure of the universe. In this way, the real story is quieter but more revealing. Genius did not grow out of mathematical weakness. It grew from early fascination, disciplined thought, and the freedom to question accepted ideas. The legend may be comforting, but the reality offers something more enduring. A portrait of intelligence shaped gradually, steadily, and with remarkable clarity from the very beginning. Carrots dramatically improve night vision. The belief that eating carrots dramatically improves night vision has been repeated for generations. It appears in school lessons, health advice, and everyday conversations. The idea feels logical. Carrots contain nutrients linked to eye health, and therefore they must enhance the ability to see in darkness. The story is simple, memorable, and widely accepted. Yet the reality behind it is more nuanced and far less dramatic than the myth suggests. Carrots are rich in beta-carotene, a compound the body converts into vitamin A. This vitamin plays an essential role in maintaining healthy vision, particularly in low-light conditions. It supports the function of photoreceptor cells in the retina, helping the eye detect light and contrast. Without sufficient vitamin A, vision can deteriorate, especially at night. In severe cases, deficiency leads to night blindness. This biological connection forms the foundation of the myth. Because vitamin A is necessary for proper night vision, it is easy to assume that consuming more carrots will continuously improve one's ability to see in darkness. But the human body does not operate in such a linear way. Once a person has enough vitamin A to maintain healthy vision, additional intake does not enhance performance beyond normal limits. The eyes do not gain extra power from excess nutrients. For individuals with a balanced diet, vitamin A levels are already sufficient to support standard visual function. Eating more carrots will not sharpen night vision, extend visual range, or allow someone to see clearly in near darkness. The benefit is preventive rather than transformative. Carrots help maintain eye health and prevent deficiency, but they do not provide extraordinary visual abilities. The persistence of this belief is partly rooted in historical messaging. During the 20th century, carrots became strongly associated with eyesight in public health campaigns. Encouraging vegetable consumption through simple, memorable claims proved effective. Over time, the message shifted from "carrots support eye health" to "carrots improve night vision." A subtle but significant change. The human mind often favors clear cause and effect relationships. When a food contains a nutrient linked to a bodily function, it feels natural to expect immediate and noticeable improvement. This expectation turns a preventive health fact into a performance-enhancing promise. The distinction between maintaining health and enhancing ability gradually disappears. Vision in low light is influenced by many factors beyond nutrition. Genetics, overall eye health, age, and environmental conditions all play roles. The sensitivity of rod cells in the retina, the speed of visual adaptation to darkness, and neurological processing contribute to how well a person can see at night. Nutrition supports these systems, but it does not override their biological limits. Another reason the myth endures is its comforting simplicity. The idea that a single food could significantly improve vision suggests control over something otherwise fixed. It implies that everyday habits can unlock hidden capabilities. This narrative is appealing and easy to share, especially because it is grounded in a real biological connection. Observing the effects of vitamin A deficiency clarifies the difference between support and enhancement. When levels drop too low, night vision becomes impaired. Restoring proper nutrition returns vision to its normal state. The improvement is real, but it is a recovery rather than an upgrade. The body is returning to equilibrium, not gaining new ability. Carrots remain valuable for eye health, as well as for overall nutrition. They contribute antioxidants and support bodily functions beyond vision. Their importance lies in maintaining stability, not in producing dramatic change. The myth transforms a steady, protective role into an exaggerated promise of transformation. Over time, repetition reinforces belief. Parents pass the message to children, teachers repeat it in simplified lessons, and it becomes embedded in cultural memory. Few people question it because it appears harmless and beneficial. Encouraging vegetable consumption is positive, and the claim feels supportive of healthy behavior. Accuracy becomes secondary to familiarity. Looking more closely reveals a quieter truth. The body relies on balance, not extremes. Nutrients sustain systems, prevent decline, and keep functions operating smoothly. They rarely push the body beyond its natural design. Vision is not enhanced by excess but preserved by sufficiency. Understanding this reframes the role of carrots. They are not a shortcut to extraordinary night vision. They are part of a broader network of nourishment that protects and maintains what the body already has. Their value lies in consistency, not intensity. The myth persists because it offers a simple story about improvement. The reality offers something more grounded. A reminder that health is built through steady support, gradual care, and balanced nutrition. Carrots contribute to that stability, helping the eyes function as they are meant to function, quietly and reliably, without dramatic transformation. In this light, the familiar claim shifts from exaggeration to appreciation. Carrots do not grant special abilities in darkness. They help preserve the delicate systems that allow sight to exist at all, ensuring that vision remains clear, stable, and resilient over time. Ending. As we've seen, many of the things people accept as facts are simply stories repeated over time. Looking closer often reveals a calmer, more complex reality behind them. If you enjoyed this journey, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more thoughtful explorations like this. Share your thoughts in the comments. Which of these myths surprised you the most? And if the video felt interesting or useful, share it with someone who might enjoy it too.